그때부터 어머니의 삶이 다시 시작이 된 것 같고 지팡이를 안 짚기 시작하셨어요. 그게 진짜 놀라운 변화인 것 같습니다.
어르신들이 운동을 통해서 노년을 건강한 생활을 할 수 있게끔 도와주는 게 바로 저는 태권도라고 생각이 듭니다.
Not only did Mother experience this change, but her fellow teammates also felt reborn due to the dramatic change in their lives.
너무 좋아요. 온 세상을 다 얻은 것 같죠. 제가 태권도 전도사가 된 것 같아요.
열정이 높으신 분이죠. 그 가족 전체가 태권도 가족입니다. 아주 화목하고 건강이 넘치는 대한민국의 대표적인 태권도 가족이 아닌가 싶습니다.
We're a family that loves practicing taekwondo, so we've embarked on a new challenge.
사실 저희 가족들이 아픔이 정말 많습니다. 제가 아침에 일어났는데 반신이 마비가 왔었고 저희 아이는 태어나자마자 인공 심박기를 달았었고 정상으로도 살기 힘들다는 진단을 받았었지만 이 아이를 보면서 기적이라는 것을 알게 됐거든요. 그래서 태권도는 행복 그 자체입니다.
태권도를 해서 강해지니까 더 자신감이 올라가고 행복해요.
I believe taekwondo is a blessing from heaven. It has made us hopeful for the future. Every day, we're excited to see what's in store for us tomorrow. Practice it with your family. Taekwondo brings happiness.
Arirang TV is conducting an overseas TV viewer survey to provide you with a better global broadcast service. Share your valuable feedback on the Arirang TV website www.arirang.com or mobile application. Survey participants will be selected at random to receive special gifts. 2025 Arirang Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
The Trump administration will lower its reciprocal tariffs on South Korea to 15% from the proposed 25%, in return for $450 billion worth of investments in the U.S., with shipbuilding being at the heart of the project. And U.S. President Donald Trump says he and President Lee Jae-myung will meet at the White House within the next 2 weeks. And what will be their first one-on-one meeting since Lee took office last month. Seoul City saw 22 tropical nights in July alone, the most ever recorded in the month of July. The extreme heat is expected to linger into August. We begin with the tariff deal sealed between South Korea and the U.S. Reciprocal tariffs have been set at 15% for South Korea in exchange for the country's billions of dollars worth of investment in the U.S. Our Park Jun-an starts us off.
South Korea and the U.S. announced a major tariff agreement on Wednesday local time to lower reciprocal tariffs from 25% to 15%. The deal, however, required South Korea to commit to a $350 billion investment package. The $350 billion will be in the form of an investment vehicle and will be spent through equity investments, loans, and credit guarantees. An additional $100 billion will be spent on purchasing U.S. energy, mostly liquefied natural gas. The South Korean government said sector-specific tariffs involving semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are guaranteed most favored nation status, ensuring treatment as favorable as that afforded to other nations.
So we've made sure that if we face tariffs in the future on things like semiconductors or pharmaceuticals, we'll receive the same treatment as most favored nation level, ensuring we're not at a disadvantage compared to other countries' agreements.
Through the deal, tariffs on automobiles have also been reduced from the current 25% to 15%. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul commented after the agreement that South Korea's shipbuilding project, which involves large-scale investments by South Korean private shipbuilders in the U.S., played a key role in the tariff negotiations.
The most noble part of today's agreement is the $150 billion South Korea-U.S. shipbuilding cooperation package, a project called Make American Shipbuilding Great Again.
This agreement will fund new U.S. shipyard construction, workforce training, supply chain rebuilding, and ship maintenance, leveraging South Korea's shipbuilding expertise. The remaining $200 billion will be spent to support strategic sectors that are closely related to the country's economic security. Those sectors include semiconductors, batteries, nuclear energy, biotechnology, and critical minerals. South Korea also pledged to purchase $100 billion worth of U.S. energy, primarily liquefied natural gas, over 4 years, redirecting existing import needs without any added economic burden. The last-minute tariffs agreement has reduced uncertainty for South Korean companies, which account for 19% of the country's global exports, ensuring they compete on equal or better terms than their rivals. Further details about the deal will be finalized in ongoing talks. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
And now let us break this down and touch on the important aspects of this trade deal. We have our Kim Do-yeon here in the studio with us. Hello, Do-yeon.
Good to be here.
So, Do-yeon, what a buildup of a couple of weeks to this point, but officials say it's not done. What does that mean?
That's right. I mean, the dust is settling, and we now know a 15% tariff will apply, but as you mentioned, it's not over. Negotiations may be done for now, but the broader fight over tariffs and the investment details is far from settled. First, here's what the Deputy Prime Minister, Koo Yoon-chul, who led the negotiations in Washington, had to say.
A 15% tariff is undoubtedly challenging, especially for a country that has a free trade agreement with the U.S. But if our companies can leverage their creativity and competitiveness, this could turn into a new opportunity. While the broader agreement is done, we will continue to work out the specifics through further talks with the U.S.
Still, at least for now, the agreement was welcomed by Korea's 6 largest business groups, including the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Korea Enterprises Federation. They issued a joint statement backing the outcome, noting that the focus areas for investment, shipbuilding, semiconductors, batteries, and bio are strategic industries where Korea holds global competitiveness. Their hope, this will help Korean firms gain more market share in the U.S.
I see, Doyan, we have to talk about the Mascot project and also another $200 billion investment in the U.S. Let's cut to the chase. Is this a good deal?
To answer that, let's look at how the government frames it, especially in contrast to Japan, Korea's biggest competitor in the U.S. market. Japan recently pledged a $550 billion investment in return for a similar tariff deal.
South Korea has a trade surplus of $66 billion with the U.S., while Japan's is around $68.5 billion. Yet our total investment fund is smaller. If we exclude the $150 billion led by our own companies, our actual contribution is $200 billion, just 36% the size of Japan's.
Now that $150 billion refers to Mascot, a South Korea-led shipbuilding initiative seen as a cornerstone of this agreement. The rest of $200 billion will be largely controlled by the U.S. Seoul has been keen to highlight this structure to draw a distinction from Japan's pledge. Japan's $550 billion investment is like Korea's $200 billion investment, with U.S. leading it. President Trump, after Japan's deal announcement, said 90% of the profits go to the U.S.
But Doyan, in terms of tariff rates, South Korea enjoyed no tariffs so far, but it's now at the same level as Japan. What do we say? What do you have to say about that?
That's right. I mean, some may say all the investment but higher tariffs, but the FTA era is largely seen as over by many experts, and expecting to keep no tariffs was really a big hope. So the playing field might be leveled right now, and Korean industries will need to work on this going forward. Take a listen to an expert.
The real game has now started. This is because we only have the framework and a brief agreement. There isn't a detailed plan out there. Will this deal impact South Korea positively and lead to a boost in the domestic economy? That's the bigger issue.
But to highlight companies that will be impacted, it's the automakers. When it comes to cars, an industry with fierce competition, while Korean cars were tariff-free, their competitors, Japan and the EU, paid 2.5%. Now, that advantage has disappeared, leveling the playing field in terms of price competitiveness.
Doyan, I also have to point out how the deal came just 2 days before the hefty duties, were supposed to kick in. But now, tell us about the pressure and also the tactics that Korean officials used that we know so far.
That's right. South Korea, as one of the major trade partners with the U.S., was actually one of the last ones to finalize this deal. Having said that, the new administration only kicked off last month, and it needed some time to finalize the cabinet to form this trade delegation. And when that was started, the discussions with the U.S. and even within the Korean government weren't so easy.
They brought up various issues, things like the age limit for cattle and rice, which are already well-known points of contention. Naturally, there were heated exchanges. Even within our own government, when discussing negotiation strategies, there were raised voices between ministries.
Now, agriculture and livestock market access was a contentious issue, but was not included in the deal. Despite strong pressure from the U.S., there were concerns for Korean farmers leading up to the negotiations as well. Officials revealed that during negotiations, they presented a photo from the 2008 mass protests in South Korea against U.S. beef imports, which drew over 10 million demonstrators, reminding U.S. officials it's a red line for them. On another side note, while President Trump did not meet with any other trade delegations, he made time to meet with South Korean officials. He later said this was a sign of his respect for South Korea.
All right, relief for now, but lots of hurdles and challenges to tackle in the coming weeks and months. Doyan, thanks so much for the coverage tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And South Korean President Lee Jae-myung notes that the trade deal with the U.S. has eliminated export uncertainties. With this, a South Korea-U.S. summit is picking up speed, which is set to take place within 2 weeks. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jang-min reports.
Uncertainties in export conditions have been substantially eliminated, and South Korea has crossed a major hurdle. That was the assessment made by President Lee Jae-myung of the U.S. trade deal, as he noted the need to navigate an international trade order that's being reorganized.
국익 중심의 유연한 실용 외교를 통해서 급변하는 대외 환경의 파고를 슬기롭게 넘어가야 될 것입니다.
Presiding over a weekly meeting with his aides on Thursday, the president instructed the officials to fully prepare for follow-up measures, as well as long-term tasks, such as expanding consumption at home and diversifying export markets. With a major diplomatic challenge somewhat removed, summit diplomacy between South Korea and the U.S. is expected to pick up speed, which has been stalled since President Lee Jae-myung took office in June. The first E-Trump summit is expected within 2 weeks.
I heard President Trump ask Secretary Rubio to set a day for next week, but considering schedules, it'll take place within 2 weeks.
Details of the summit, including the date, could be discussed when South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun meets his U.S. counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington on Thursday local time. The summit agenda is expected to include setting out details of the deal's framework. Security issues such as the allies' defense cost-sharing and purchasing U.S.-made weapons were not addressed this time, but could be brought up when the two leaders meet. Earlier in the day, South Korea's Defense Minister An Gyubek spoke over the phone with U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, where they agreed to modernize the alliance and expand cooperation in shipbuilding. All this as the South Korea leader says he expects Seoul and Washington to further strengthen their economic cooperation and alliance. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And rival parties in the National Assembly are poles apart on the U.S. trade deal. The ruling Democratic Party welcomed the agreement, calling it the result of a firm defense of national interest and a valuable achievement of President Lee's pragmatic diplomacy. Floor Leader Kim Byung-gi said Thursday that the deal would further strengthen the bilateral alliance and industrial ties. The main opposition, People Power Party, expressed a concern that Korea may have conceded too much, while acknowledging that the 15% tariff rate was reasonable. PPP Floor Leader Song Won-seok pointed out that the pledged investments in and imports from the U.S. are excessive, surpassing the country's foreign exchange reserves. Hot weather here in Korea isn't just a daytime issue as it lingers well into the night. As Seoul City experienced 22 tropical nights this July alone, the most for the month in 117 years. Our Park Kwon-woo has more.
Seoul's summer nights continue to stay hot and longer than usual. At least 22 tropical nights were recorded in Seoul this July. That's the longest period for the month in 117 years, since related data first began to be compiled in 1908. A tropical night refers to when the overnight low, between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. the next day, does not drop below 25 degrees Celsius. The previous record for the longest stretch of tropical nights in July was set in 1994 with 21. But with one more day left till August in Korea, this year's record may climb further. Adding to the heat, Seoul also logged its highest ever overnight low for July on Wednesday into Thursday at 29.3 degrees. The previous was 29.2 degrees 7 years ago, according to the Korea Meteorological Administration.
The Tibetan and North Pacific high-pressure systems have overlapped over Korea, trapping heat in the atmosphere. Hot, humid air from the south is also being drawn in, while intense sunlight continues, making scorching days and tropical nights persist.
Asked whether this trend may continue due to climate change, the KMA said it's hard to predict, as tropical nights are largely driven by variables, including complex pressure patterns in the atmosphere. Still, the weather agency forecasts tropical nights to continue for the time being, although some rain is expected after August 6. The authorities are advising people to take precautions against heat-related illnesses, including keeping indoor temperatures and humidity moderate, ensuring proper ventilation, staying hydrated, and doing light exercises before bed for a good night's sleep. 박건우, Arirang News.
According to data released by Statistics Korea on Thursday, South Korea's industrial output rebounded in June for the first time in 3 months. This was largely thanks to strong performances in the semiconductor and automobile sectors. Consumer spending also turned upward for the first time in 4 months, with increased sales of clothing and cosmetics. However, facility investment fell for the 4th consecutive month due to a decline in transportation equipment investment, marking the longest downturn in 7 years. Now, overall, the all-industry production index for June stood at 113.8, an increase of 1.2% from the previous month. Samsung Electronics on Thursday reported a second quarter operating profit of $3.4 billion. That's a 55% plunge from a year ago and over 21% lower than market expectations. In its regulatory filing, the company also recorded a net income of 5.1 trillion won, which marks a 48% drop on year. This was largely due to sluggish demand for high bandwidth memory chips. The semiconductor division posted a profit of only 400 billion won, which is the lowest since the 4th quarter of 2023. However, despite weak profits, overall chip sales climbed 11% on year, driven by demand for premium server chips and increased foundry orders. Also today, the government unveiled its 2025 tax reform framework, aiming to both rebuild the nation's weakened revenue base for fiscal sustainability and also support economic growth and livelihoods. Our finance correspondent Moon Ji-young explains.
The 2025 tax reform bill introduces a mix of targeted tax credits for strategic industries and welfare, alongside adjustments to corporate and capital gains taxes.
Over the past 3 years, our tax revenue base has weakened rapidly, leading to a significant drop in the tax burden ratio. Therefore, this year's tax reform bill prioritizes reinforcing the weakened tax revenue base for fiscal sustainability, while also supporting economic strength and stabilizing people's livelihoods.
The reform package aims to enhance tax credits for R&D and investment in future strategic industries, including AI. Furthermore, to enhance K-content competitiveness, tax credits for webtoons will be newly introduced, and tax support for video content creation will be expanded. Beyond these targeted incentives, the framework includes tax cuts designed to encourage corporate payouts and boost the stock market. Specifically, to encourage high dividends, a separate taxation system for dividend income from high dividend companies is being introduced. This approach excludes these dividends from the comprehensive financial income tax base, allowing earnings from stock dividends to be taxed independently rather than combined with other income. Despite the debate over tax cuts for the super rich, a 35% tax rate is expected to be applied to the highest dividend income bracket. On the other hand, the bill aims to restore tax equity and rebuild the nation's revenue base based on the principle of ability to pay. The country's corporate tax rate will be raised by 1 percentage point across the board, with the top corporate rate increasing to 25%, effectively reversing a cut introduced by the previous administration. The bill also tightens capital gains tax rules by lowering the threshold for major shareholders. While currently only those holding 5 billion won, or roughly $3.6 million in a single listed stock, are taxed, that threshold will be reduced to 1 billion won, or just under $720,000. Tax support will be expanded for low and middle income households, with measures such as an increase in the income deduction limit for credit card use by up to 500,000 won, or roughly $360, depending on the number of children for families. The tax burden on self-employed individuals and small business owners is also expected to be alleviated. The bill will first go through cabinet meetings before being submitted to the National Assembly for final approval. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Another shooting took place in Gaza as people queued up for food, leaving at least 48 dead. This comes as Canada has outspokenly stated its intentions to formally recognize the State of Palestine. Our An Sung-jin has the details.
Canada says it plans to join several countries in formally recognizing Palestine as a state. According to Prime Minister Mark Carney during the cabinet meeting on Wednesday, Canada intends to do so at a meeting of the UN General Assembly in September this year, as long as preconditions are met.
This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state.
Canada also signed the New York Call, a joint statement of the ministers of foreign affairs from 15 countries, including Australia, France, and Spain, that calls for an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages, and a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine live within secure and recognized borders. Conditions in Gaza remain dire. Israeli soldiers reportedly killed at least 48 Palestinians. According to Associated Press on Wednesday, IDF soldiers opened fire on a crowd at a key gateway for aid trucks at a checkpoint in the north of the Strip. This incident comes as Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is headed to Israel for talks on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. UN agencies have repeatedly stated that the population has already exceeded the threshold for famine in the Gaza Strip. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Searing heat continues to grip the entire nation. Tomorrow brings more of the same, scorching sun, sweltering air, and no sign of relief just yet. The extreme heat will persist with daytime temperatures once again reaching above 35 degrees Celsius in most parts. Many of us in the capital area felt relief today thanks to that cloud coverage. But there will be nothing but sunshine tomorrow with very strong UV rays nationwide. Then brace for another sweaty night. And it looks like here in the capital area is having the roughest summer this year with a low of 28 degrees Celsius here in the capital, Daegu, Gyeongju, starting off the day at 24 degrees. Then by the afternoon, most parts will see highs soaring to 36 degrees Celsius. The intense heat is here to stay. Then around the middle of next week, rainfall in the central regions may help to ease the extreme heat that's gripped the nation for weeks. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for this hour. We'll be back in a moment with a panel discussion.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea. If you've signed a contract for a one room, obviously you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
Attention fans around the world, the final episode, Simply K-pop Gateway to Korea for the year will begin. Coming in strong with a powerful performance and hip charms that'll pull you right in. Ensign. The energy of the youth melted wistfully into the stage. I hope. The time to fall into the fantastic melody that'll raise your happiness level. Purple Kiss. A song that'll cool you down like a Christmas present. In this middle of summer, close your eyes. Get ready for these exciting stages this week on Simply K-pop Gateway to Korea. Make sure to join us. Don't miss out. Close your eyes. No, open your eyes.
drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% since rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket.
아리랑 도시는 세계와 연결되어 문화를 창조했고 새로운 것을 받아들였다.
함께여서 우리는 더 자유롭고 더 멀리 갈 수 있어.
닫힌 문이 아니라 열린 질문으로
나에게 A백은
자유,
융합,
국제성,
다양성, 포용,
개발.
신라의 정신이 에이펙 2025로 이어집니다.
Tariffs of 15% on South Korean exports in return for a whopping $415 billion investment in the U.S. That's the deal that settled months-long tariff talks between Seoul and Washington. And following the dramatic agreement will be a summit between the leaders of the two countries. Tonight, we're joined by Hannah Kim, Associate Professor at Seoul University's GSIS. Hello there, Professor Kim.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And also connecting with us is Hwa-Kyun Kim, Professor of Banking and Finance at the Mays Business School of Texas A&M University. Welcome.
Pleasure.
Professor Kim, $115 billion out of the $350 billion will go to shipbuilding for the U.S. I'm talking about the Alaska project that's at the heart of the final deal with Washington. The question is, what's so special about shipbuilding that eventually convinced U.S. President Donald Trump?
So revitalizing America's shipbuilding industry has been at the top of the Trump administration's agenda. And after decades of underinvestment, U.S. shipyards lag far behind global competitors, especially China, I think. They're leaving the country rather dependent on foreign-built vessels and vulnerable in strategic maritime sectors. So in a sense, by offering to rebuild U.S. shipyards and bolster naval maintenance, this package or slogan Alaska, I think, spoke directly to the urgent need to counter China's rapid naval expansion and also assert some maritime dominance that's so far enjoyed by the U.S. So in that regard, Korea, I think, is uniquely positioned to deliver because it's one of the best shipbuilding countries and also brings cutting-edge technology, deep workforce expertise, and other, many good the items actually that Korea has. So I think in that regard, probably the Trump was happy with the package.
Right, that is why it's so appealing to the Trump administration. Professor Kim, I'd like to ask one more question then. What, in terms of shipbuilding, are we contributing? Are we, building ships, providing repairs or maintenance? What are we really good at, and what do we really gain from it?
So the details need to be revealed, but I guess everything you mentioned probably will be important. So I guess Korea already demonstrates some power or ability beyond greenfield construction through large-scale maintenance, repair, and overhaul operations on U.S. naval vessels. So I think Hanwha Ocean's completion of major repair in March or something on U.S. cargo ship in South Korea showcases, I think, that type of the technical capability and also efficiency. So definitely this maintenance, repair, and overhaul expertise is going to be an important part. And also, I think that South Korea can help modernize equipment sourcing and supply networks, drawing on Korea's track records. And I think that's going to be more like an integrated approach, including engineering, production, and logistics. And the supply chain management is going to be something also important in this stage. So I think the steel and all this kind of things will be also included. We'll see how it unravels. But I think at this stage, it's more like integrated approach, including capital investment all the way, shipbuilding, and also the maintenance, I think.
A lot to offer from the South Korean side. Professor Hannah Kim, and there's that for shipbuilding. Now, another $200 billion is being invested in chips, nuclear power, batteries, and biotech. I do have to say these are the fields in which Korean firms are really good at. On top of that, about $100 billion worth of LNG and other energy products will be imported over roughly 4 years now. Could this be called the beginning of the so-called energy diplomacy, or have I gone too far? What do you think?
Well, maybe we could describe it as energy diplomacy, because when we define energy diplomacy, it usually refers to the use of energy resources, trade, infrastructure, and policy as instruments to advance a country's foreign policy goals and strategic interests. So in that sense, some may argue that this could reasonably be described as the beginning or even deepening of a so-called energy diplomacy between South Korea and the United States. And in many ways, I think it was a very clever strategy for South Korea to seek negotiations with the United States in this sector, as you mentioned, because there's a lot of advantages here. South Korea, but also South Korea has limitations in terms of its own energy supply and inevitably has to rely on imports. So purchasing American energy and thereby delivering a tangible outcome for President Trump was a wise move. But if we should still exercise a bit of caution when we're describing this as the beginning of energy diplomacy, because globally, significant efforts are still underway to reduce the use of fossil fuels. And I believe that we are all experiencing the effects of climate change firsthand. I know that I have in South Korea over the summer. So amidst this, the Trump administration is going against the trend of reducing CO2 emissions and is actively developing fossil fuel resources. So, South Korea, under U.S. pressure, has little choice but to expand its imports of American energy. So this move is not entirely in line with the South Korean government's broader policy of reducing fossil fuel consumption. So in many ways, it might still be a little too early to say that we are at energy diplomacy level.
I see. Turning to you, Professor Kim, over in Texas. Now, Japan and the EU already dealt with the Trump administration. Japan is investing $550 billion in the U.S. and EU $600 billion, and us, South Korea, is pouring $315 billion. Would you say this is an appropriate scale of investment considering South Korea's GDP?
Well, at this stage, it's not that easy to compare because it's not like really apples to apples because although this amount is announced, but the details actually are unknown, to be honest. So whether these are going to be pure cash or which is not, of course. So depending on the composition, I think, of the amount to be invested, and also the timing is going to be very important. So I heard the briefings from the Korean part, and it looks like there will be a lot of different ways of funding use, such as capital calls and other things, so that more like, the gradual and very, very sequential contingency type of the planning for financing is used. I don't know how things will be used. These kind of things will be financed in case of other the deals for the Japan and also the EU. So it's going to depend. But of course, if you look at the number as is, then the investment amount to the GDP ratio, clearly, for Korea's case, I think is higher. It's around like 13.7% compared to, say, about about 19.6% compared to Japan's 13.7%, or even lower, 5% of the EU. But if you look at the details, like in the shipbuilding part or some of the part in case of the Korean deal, it's probably something already pledged or is something to be already being done. So in that case, and especially if it's going to be sequentially done, then I think that's not going to be as big of a concern as it is. Definitely it is like a big amount for the size of the economy. So it's a risky investment. So I think it is important for the profitability and also the reliability of these projects to be evaluated before giving loans or providing credit lines, etc. But I think that's overall, I think it's not of a concern too much, but still, of course, it's going to be a very important, the angle that South Korea has to look at.
Right, something we have to be mindful of before fully investing. That is why a deal is sealed, but details have to be finalized, like you said.
I guess so.
Professor Kim, another huge part of Wednesday's deal is that South Korea will get favorable treatment when it comes to future tariffs on chips and pharmaceuticals. Does that mean we are being especially favored, especially compared to Japan or the EU?
I think it'd be nice to believe that we are being especially favored, and I hope that that's the case. But it is still a little too early to say. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick indicated that South Korea is being considered for exceptional treatment, and he stated that South Korea will not be treated less favorably than other countries. So, in the very least, we won't be treated less favorably, especially when it comes to semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. So, in this regard, yes, South Korea can receive a bit more favorable treatment. In particular, can be the case if South Korea can be explicitly guaranteed relief or exemptions from future tariffs or on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, but we'll have to see regarding that. At the same time, there are some lingering doubts about how much we can trust or how much trust we can place in Secretary Lutnick's words. For instance, on his social media, Lutnick claimed that 90% of the profits from South Korean government will be going to the American people.
Right.
But according to the South Korean presidential office, this was never agreed upon between the two countries. And this was merely a unilateral assertion made by Secretary Lutnick. So, and in addition to this, President Trump could potentially overturn Secretary Lutnick's statements at any time. So given these circumstances, I think while Lutnick's comments suggest special treatment for South Korea's semiconductors and pharmaceutical sectors, and this is positive, we should also be prepared for the possibility that this may not materialize.
Well, Professor Hwang Kyung-Kim, then 15% for South Korea, then Trump said U.S. products will enter the Korean market tariff-free. Now, will that affect our industries in any way? South Korean industry, I'm talking about. Now, as far as I understand, tariffs were never a problem for American products to enter here, South Korea.
Yes, I agree. Under the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement implemented in 2012, as we know well, virtually all American goods have enjoyed zero or minimal tariffs when entering the Korean market, and by 2024, effective average duty rate was around like less than 1%, so 0.79%. So that meant that major U.S. exports from like agricultural products or technological products or cars and whatever already benefit a lot from a virtual tariff elimination years ago. So I don't think it's going to be really the new thing from the U.S. side. Of course, there's some, the non-entry, tariff barriers exist, and some of them are kept, and others actually will be lifted, and maybe there could be some effects out of that. But it's mostly about just reaffirming the zero tariffs on cars, trucks, and farming goods, I think. So it's not going to be that much of a difference. In case of our industry, on the other hand, we have to pay, the South Korea actually has to pay like 15% tariff. So is it going to be a big disadvantage? Then to some extent, yes. But I guess it is going to be tariff imposed on all countries virtually, except for the U.S. domestic firms. So some of the items or products and services competing directly with the U.S. firms, yes, there will be some negative impacts. But for all the other type of the products that are competed for, among these foreign countries, I think there will be very limited effects. It is going to be eating up the profitability for sure, but eventually it's going to also increasing the price. We know that this type of tax is going to be eventually, also given to consumers as well as producers. So I think, overall effect we have to see. Exactly.
Well, the tariff deal, fortunately, I have to say, didn't include anything about defense costs, Professor Hannah Kim, something that U.S. President Donald Trump wanted to handle as a one-package deal, as we all know. Now, why was it left out, do you think?
Well, previously, as you mentioned, there were a lot of rumors that during the negotiation, various issues would be brought up to the table. Not only would the issue of increasing Korea's defense cost burden be brought up, but also matters such as adjusting the role of the U.S.-PAC alliance and South Korea's exchange rate issue could also be discussed. Some even speculated that the U.S. might try to expand the scope of the alliance to the broader Indo-Pacific region or pressure Korea to appreciate the Korean won. And fortunately, like you mentioned, these issues were left out of the negotiations, and the negotiations seem to focus primarily on bilateral trade and South Korea's investment in the United States. And this I think suggests that President Trump places greater importance on producing outcomes that can be showcased to the public. So, for example, an expanded U.S.-ROC alliance aimed at containing China or Korea agreeing to significantly appreciate the won may not necessarily be easily understood by the average American who is less aware of things happening here. So in contrast, the announcement that Korea will invest $350 billion in the US is something that people can immediately grasp. So ultimately, it appears that such tangible outcomes are what President Trump wants and what he seemed to prioritize. That said, once the current phase has passed, issues like defense cost sharing and the role of the alliance could reemerge at any time, depending on President Trump's, decision making. But it is somewhat unpredictable. Still, the South Korean government must have learned a great deal about how to approach negotiations with the Trump administration through this late round. And I believe that even if other difficult issues are brought up, which will be in the future, then now South Korea is going to be able to negotiate more effectively by drawing on the experience gains this time.
Then are you saying that the defense cost sharing stuff will show up eventually?
I think it will. It's just that now we have a little bit more time to be prepared and we have a better idea of how to negotiate. It's just that right now it may not have been the main priority.
Right. We are learning more and more about the Trump administration under the new Lee Jae-myung administration. I'm staying with you, Professor Hannah Kim. The good thing is that the two leaders of South Korea and the U.S. are meeting, within the next 2 weeks, the White House confirmed. Now, how do you think President Lee Jae-myung and President Donald Trump spend their first face-to-face talks? Do you think they'll go over the tariff deal or ROC-U.S. alliance? What do you think?
I think it's going to be a very interesting meeting. Like you mentioned, it's going to be in person within the next 2 weeks, most likely at the White House. And this bilateral summit is going to be the first time the two meet face to face. I think they had a short phone call just a few days after Lee Jae-myung's inauguration, but this is the first time they're going to be meeting face to face. So as a result of that, this meeting is going to be very important. But it's also very urgent because of the political vacuum that South Korea was in for the past 7 months. There are a lot of issues that need to be discussed and a lot of things that need to be brought to the table. But there are some issues that are more pressing than others, and as a result of that, the agenda will likely be twofold, focusing more on balancing economic and tariff issues with strategic alliance priorities. So to be more specific, it's likely that the tariff and trade issues will be brought up, especially because this is kind of the most important thing that we've been discussing recently regarding the U.S. and South Korea. And especially because of the recently agreed 15% tariff rate, there's also possibly going to be discussions on details on investment and energy commitments, as we've been talking about, and details on the sector-specific treatment of issues, topics such as semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. But at the same time, strategic alliance issues also need to be discussed. So they will most likely be discussed in terms of reinforcing, the alliance. I think that will help show that this is not just an economic meeting, but a reaffirmation of long-term alliance priorities in the face of evolving regional threats. And as a result, it's likely that there's going to be discussions on extended deterrence, defense cooperation, cost sharing, Indo-Pacific strategic coordination, among many others. I think in addition to this, there are a lot of other topics that do need to be discussed, but it's very likely that this summit will be a dual-track meeting regarding these two broader topics.
Right. It's certainly a good sign that in-person, leader-level diplomacy will be, officially resumed. Professor Hwa Kyung Kim, countries around the world are facing unprecedented tariff threats from the Trump administration. South Korea, Japan, the EU, nobody is exception here. Now, and this new world trade order is shaped by the Trump administration. How should South Korea really respond to going forward from now?
Well, as you mentioned, well, it's basically the situation faced by all countries other than the U.S. itself. In some sense, actually, U.S. is also facing it because tax is going to increase in some sense at some future point of time. So, for this type of the uphill battle, I think it's important to have first growth and diversification, similar to all other financial and economic difficulties. So I think clearly the diversification is going to be important in that not just the U.S., but I think you have to really expand the markets to other countries. It's a textbook advice, but it's important. We actually really have to think now seriously about selling products to other underdeveloped countries and as well as developed countries. And also in terms of diplomacy, actually, it's going to be very important to diversify as much as possible so that you don't get too kind of swayed by the U.S. policy. And at the same time, growth is always very important. So the R&D and these kind of things will be important so that the demand, the loyalty, basically price elasticity should be lower so that even if the price goes up, the all foreign consumers will still demand the Korean products and things like that's going to be the most important thing, because even if the prices are going up, if people still want to have that products, people buy it. So I think that's going to be important part. So.
Indeed, South Korea can take a breather for now, but still negotiations are still ongoing. Professor Hwa Kyun Kim, thanks so much for connecting with us all the way from Texas tonight.
Always a pleasure.
And also, Professor Hannah Kim, thanks so much for your analysis tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.